Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena. Look at my beautiful new blue box. If you know, you know. We're basically ready to leave Trinidad, but before we do, I want to install this second inverter charger to fix our annoying shore power issue. We'll get back to that later. We also have an exciting hike up to a plane crash planned. And last but not least, it's time to fire up that 3D printer we brought back from the US. If you're new here, we're Ava and Mess. I spent 7 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Trident Warrior sailboat named Athena. It was an oh glorious sanding extravaganza. We left Denmark and started cruising full-time, sailing down Europe's west coast, and then we had our biggest adventure yet, crossing the Atlantic. Now we're sanding and sailing our way around the world. I am a huge sucker for a nice blue box, but let's save this second inverter charger for a little bit later in the video. The first thing I want to do is to fire up our 3D printer, because there are a few items I want to print this week, and hopefully I can show you why I think a 3D printer is a useful doohickey on a sailboat. We brought back this lovely used Prusa Mini from the US. I chose the Prusa Mini because I was able to partially disassemble it, meaning it took up a lot less room in our luggage. And we can also partially disassemble it here on the boat if we're really in need of space savings. And I think for somebody that needs something small that you're able to disassemble, well, there's nothing out there that really beats the Prusa Mini. As you can see here, I've already printed the first few objects. These are test plugs of a sort. Each one of these plugs is 1/10 of a millimeter larger than the previous one. I printed this test because I need these to be a nice snug fit. I designed my little plugs here in Fusion 360, and that's the other reason why I thought it'd be fun to get a 3D printer, because this way I have some motivation for learning CAD, which I think is going to come in very useful for our next refit. Now, after having designed the items in 360, I then imported them into a Prusa slicer and generated the G-code, put that into the 3D printer, and after I think it's about an hour, we had all of these plugs. Why do I need the plugs? Well, for that, we will have to step into the shower. We have these two access hatches here to give us access to a through hole and to a bunch of plumbing. Now, I don't know if I lost them or if they just never came with the hatches, but I don't have any plugs to cover up the screws here, and it's looking a little meh. Of course, I would like these plugs to be a nice snug fit, so yeah, that's why I printed all of these to find the perfect size. 11.6 millimeters? Oh, that's way too loose. How about 11.9 millimeters? Oh, that's a nice snug fit, but what about 12 millimeters? I think that is a winner. Why not just measure and print the size you need? Well, because I don't know how accurate the 3D printer is, and I want this to be a nice snug fit. Now, using my little test plugs here, the one I printed to be exactly 12 millimeters is actually more like 11.85, I would say. So we're off by a little over 1/10 of a millimeter. I've made a circle here in Fusion 360, and then if we just make that about 3 millimeters thick, I think should be a good thickness for it. And then we can rotate this and see that should be a nice plug. I've imported the plug from Fusion 360 into Prusa Slicer, which is what's going to generate G-code that the 3D printer actually understands. Now, I need 22 of these, but let's just start with one, just in case we've made some kind of mistake. This is such a tiny doohickey, it should be super quick to print. I don't care how many times I see something getting 3D printed, it always just seems a little bit like magic. That took exactly 6 minutes, so let's see how our little plug fits, if I can get it off of here. There we go. It's probably not going to show up on camera, but the side of the plug that was facing against the print bed is super nice and smooth, so that's what I'm going to face out here in the shower. That looks freaking awesome. It took about 40 minutes, but we have the first batch of plugs ready here in my hand. Now, while I was waiting for this to print, I went ahead and designed the next thing I want to print, which is right here. But let's fit the plugs first. Here we have the before shot, and here is the after shot. You would have to be blind to not think that this looks a heck of a lot better. What is this next doohickey, you might ask? Well, if you direct your attention here to the nav station, we have this pole, which is a structural part of the boat, but also it's really nice to grab onto when the boat is rocking. But here around the nav station, there's a somewhat unseemly hole. We can dress this up with a little trim ring and make it look a heck of a lot better. And wouldn't you know it, it's already getting whipped up here on the 3D printer. I've designed it as two separate parts so we can fit it around the stainless steel pole. Right now the printer is a little over halfway done with the first half. As you can see, I designed this in Fusion 360. The hole here in the middle, I think, is 25.1 millimeters, so I have a 1/10 of a millimeter worth of clearance. So hopefully that'll turn out okay. And I just put a chamfer here on the edge just to make it look a little bit nicer. Fresh off of the printer. Now, yeah, I knew I was a little bit optimistic with the clearance there. We need to have just a little bit bigger hole in the center. But you can see what I'm going for here. This looks a heck of a lot better than this, right? Rather than redesigning all of this in CAD, because it's just a one-off part, I'm simply just going to ask the slicer to make it 4% bigger. Aha! Look at this! 4% bigger, yet 100% better. Those extra 4% make all the difference in the world. I'm gonna glue these two halves together with a little bit of super glue, but we don't have any, so I'll have to go get that. Of course, 3D printing is not only useful if you want to do your own designs in CAD. There are tons of objects out there that you can find on different websites that you can just print. And while I'm getting super glue, let's see if we can print one or two of those. As planned, I went on a little excursion and I found super glue, but then when I got back to the boat in typical boat project fashion, I got sidetracked. See, we have a water maker with an auto flush system, and that auto flush system has a little motorized valve, and apparently that valve had gotten stuck while we were up on the hard. I took the little gray housing off of the valve and there was no resistance in turning the valve, so that wasn't the issue. I then opened up the little gray box, inspected all of the electronics and couldn't find anything wrong there. So I opened up the gearbox and checked out that and couldn't really find anything wrong there either. So I just reassembled everything and tried powering it up, and then it worked for some odd reason. So yeah, boats are delightful. Anywho, now that we've successfully completed that side quest, I have applied superglue to the trim ring on the pole here, and it feels pretty sturdy. As a little test, I also applied superglue to the one that was a little bit too small, and yeah, that is actually surprisingly strong. That's... Jesus. Oh, yeah, I can't break that. There's an ever so tiny amount of texture to the surface here. I could go over this with a bit of putty and some paint, and it would look like $1,000,000, but for now, I think we'll just leave it as is. During my little auto flush side quest, I ended up printing a few more objects here. I found this on the internet. This is a mount for our Apple TV. Right now that Apple TV is just rolling around the bottom of a locker, so this will keep it a little bit more organized. I also designed and printed this hook specifically for our Bose headphones that we use for editing. And I also printed this, which is a little drawer for organizing our SD cards so that we're absolutely sure we don't format an SD card that we haven't downloaded the footage off of yet. And last but not least, this little guy. This little guy is for Ava. It's a stamp of sorts for embossing leather so we can get our logo on little leather doohickeys that Ava wants to make. These are just a few examples. There are tons of other cool things we could 3D print, like maybe some line holder doohickeys for the cockpit, maybe like a cup holder, a long list, whatever the imagination can draw up. Now, of course, there are some limitations in regards to what filament you're printing with, and because I'm still very new to 3D printing, all of this stuff is just printed in what's called PLA, which is relatively easy to print with, but is maybe not the most durable of filaments. So yeah, choice of filament is something to be aware of. back a couple of different types of filament here. We have some PETG over here, and we have some PLA Plus or PLA Professional over here. Now, certain types of filament are more moisture sensitive than others, and a boat is often a pretty moist environment, so I was a little bit concerned about that before buying the 3D printer. But of course, here in the galley we have an electric oven, which means if we do have any moisture issues, we can always dry out our filament in the oven. Another boat-related concern I had before buying the 3D printer was whether or not the motion of the boat was going to somehow affect the print quality on the 3D printer. But before bringing the printer back to the boat, I put it on a wobbly chair in Michigan and tried printing there while shaking the chair back and forth, and it didn't seem like that had any effect at all, and I haven't noticed any effect since we've been here back on the boat, and the boat is rocking a little bit here in the marina. So yeah, I don't think that's something to be too concerned about. I am sure the little Prusa Mini is gonna pop up in future boat projects here aboard Athena, and I am really excited about now having a better excuse to spend some time learning CAD. But now it's time for something completely different. It's time for Ava and I to get out of the boat, get some fresh, although be it uncomfortably warm air, and go for a hike. There is an old tracking station not too far from here that is really cool, and also a plane that crashed in the 70s, I think. We got picked up by our local friends Joseph and Rai, and they whisked us off on this exciting adventure. After a short 10-minute drive, we arrived at the starting point with a sign indicating the route to the tracking station. The hike starts in what's called the Bamboo Cathedral, which, as you can see here, got its name from the giant bamboos leaning in over the paved road. Even if you're not going all the way up to the tracking station, the Bamboo Cathedral is well worth a visit. It didn't take long for us to reach our first water break and a scenic viewpoint, with a very impressive view of the north coast of Trinidad and Venezuela way off in the distance. After our short break, we continued the hike and came across an encouraging message on the road that sadly turned out to be a somewhat cruel two-part joke. Within long, we encountered a promising sign. An unsafe structure must mean we're getting close. Neither of us had seen pictures of the tracking station beforehand, and we were both blown away by the size of it. This thing is massive.
There is a ton of history here in Chaguaramas, not only for Trinidad and Tobago, but also for the entire world. Up until the 1970s, the majority of Chaguaramas was a U.S. military base. That came about with the onset of World War II, when the U.S. needed to extend its reach in the Caribbean. The U.S. and Great Britain signed an agreement in 1940 which gave the U.S. a 99-year lease on land to build military bases in 8 Caribbean islands, including here in Trinidad. The military base drastically changed this area, causing all of the villages to be demolished or abandoned. And even though the military base was closed around 1977, all that's left is this abandoned radar. During the 1950s and 60s, during the Cold War, the ballistic warning system was born, and it was developed to detect intercontinental missiles from, of course, the Soviet Union. Since the US had a base here, they thought that this would be the perfect place to build the prototype of the radar system. And a fun fact, the first ever intercontinental message was sent from right here in Trinidad to Floyd Air Force Base in New York. And hold on to your cell phones, people, because this radar system is immensely important. It eventually paved the way for real-time communication, leading to none other than the internet and cell phones. All because of this big mama right here.
The 4 intrepid explorers set off on the next leg of the hike, which took us away from the paved road onto a path, which quickly turned into a barely visible path through the dense forest. As the canopy closed above us and the forest closed around us, the humidity shot up and this cold weather aficionado started sweating profusely. This part of the hike was more challenging than the first part, especially if you're cursed with impossibly small girl shorts pockets and a big phone. After much huffing, puffing and sweating, we reached the plane crash. The plane crashed into the side of the mountains in the 70s due to poor visibility. Fortunately, everybody aboard survived, but hiking out must have been a challenge. The interior of the plane has been stripped, all of the instruments are gone, but there is still some remnants of authentic 70s carpet hanging around. The plane is well worth visiting. Now there's a sign telling you not to steal parts of the plane. Unfortunately, there's no mention of not painting your name on the sign, and this maroon named Kissy did just that. The 4 explorers hiked back out the way they came in. Considering this is the cool season here in Trinidad, I would warn any other cold weather aficionados from attempting this hike during the summer. Today was plenty hot and humid for me. This week didn't go quite as I had planned. I'm basically out of shooting time for this week, and I haven't yet installed my lovely new blue box here. And also, I haven't found the last crucial component for this installation. Even though I can't install my lovely blue box today, I still want to just tell you why we've gotten this second inverter charger. Athena is set up for 230 volts, 50 hertz, because that's the standard in Europe, right? So our galley here is based on that, our washer dryer in there is based on that. All of the AC consumers here on the boat are 230 volts, 50 hertz. Of course, on this side of the Atlantic, they have 120 volts, 60 hertz. Now, first off, the difference in frequency, the 50 to 60 hertz, has not been a big challenge for us. The only thing on the boat that doesn't work here in 60 hertz land is our microwave. And getting the boat back to 50 hertz is super easy. We just need to disconnect from shore power, and then the inverter charger just automatically defaults back to 50 hertz. But what has proven to be a little bit of a challenge is the higher than expected voltage here on the dock. I installed an isolation transformer to be able to step 115 up to 240. But here on the dock, we're getting not 115, not 120, but 130 volts, meaning on the secondary side, the output side of the isolation transformer, we're seeing above 270 volts, which is outside of the voltage range for our inverter charger. I am expecting this to be much less of an issue once we hit the United States, because at least I'm assuming the grid there is a little bit more well regulated than down here, where it's a little bit more like the Wild West, because we're seeing pretty significant fluctuations in voltage here. The silver lining here is that we have an opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 blue box. Now, if we manage to find a new project boat to start refitting in the US, we're probably going to end up being in the US for maybe 5 years. And while we're there, it would be nice, in case our 230 volt toaster breaks, to be able to go out and buy a new 120 volt toaster and still be able to use that on the boat. Meaning we need a 120 volt inverter for the boat. Here is our current setup, like 230 volts. We have a shore power plug, our isolation transformer, the Quattro 5000, which is our 230 volt inverter charger, and then we have some AC distribution. Now for the new setup, we'll still have 1 shore power connection, we'll have 1 isolation transformer, then we'll have a 2 or 3 pole switch here. Up here we'll have the 230 volt side, and down here we'll have the new Multi-Plus 2000 120 volt inverter charger. I think this is going to be pretty awesome because, as I mentioned, it'll give us both 230 volts and 120 volts here inside of the boat, even while at anchor. And we'll also get a much wider voltage range for charging of shore power. The Quattro 5000, our 230 volt inverter charger, has a voltage range of 187 to 270 volts. The Multi-Plus 2000 has a voltage range from 94 volts up to 140. So that means if we have both, we can cover the span between 95 volts up to 270 volts. With that wide voltage range, we have the option of not using the step-up feature in the isolation transformer in case we're connected to shore power somewhere where it's a little bit wacky, like here where the voltage is super high. A cleaner solution to this issue would be if the output side of the isolation transformer had a bit of configurability, so that you could lower the voltage a little bit, so we don't end up in a situation like here where the input voltage is too high and there's nothing we can do. But yeah, we can't do that, and this I don't think is a bad solution. As I mentioned, I have found basically everything I need to install the new lovely blue box here, except for the 2-pole switch. Now there's no great urgency here. We're probably going to end up leaving Trinidad in the very near future, and yeah, we're not going to see much shore power until we get to the US. So yeah, we might postpone it for a little bit, but at least we have almost everything we need. And on that delightfully positive note, we'll end this week's video here. Next week, well, I think we still have a little bit of weather that needs to blow through.
Yeah.
And then we'll get a weather window to start heading north. A really nice looking weather window, by the way.
Yep. Next week, I think we'll go see some parts of Trinidad.
Yep. That is the plan, at least. So yeah, we hope to see all you guys back here aboard Athena next week for some Trinidad stuff. Oh yeah, next week we're also gonna do like a tips and tricks thing for
that's right.
If you're coming to Trinidad as a cruiser, you might want to know where the chantleries are, with the restaurants or the yard or whatever, where stuff is.
Yeah.
And that's also going to be in next week's video. So yeah, we'll end this week's video here. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video,
please remember to leave a like.
See you. Pew, 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 pew. God, I print a new trim ring and then I put stuff over it so you can't see it, but still there.